Hello, everybody. We're back again with author Kevin McAleer and myself after a 2 or 3 month hiatus. And we've decided that we'd like to try a session or two, probably just one, but you never know how these things turn out. We're going to be covering Stephen Crane, the, the great author from the turn of the century, um, American, of course. No, is he American? Yeah, he is. He is American, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I forgot to check that point, but I believe he's American. Um, and Kevin suggested we cover four stories today with possible oblique references to a Maggie, a girl of the streets, and the Red Badge of Courage. But the four stories we want to cover in depth today are The Blue Hotel, The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky, The Monster, and The Open Boat. Now, some of those titles might be familiar to you viewers out there, and especially The Open Boat, I think, and The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky, because those are the two that I always got in my English classes in the various anthologies. And and of course, the Red Badge of Courage is often included in school curricula, but we're not going to be covering that today. We might mention it here and there, but it's not the focus of our discussion. Those four aforementioned short stories are what we're covering. And I'd like to ask Kevin, we've got an hour here and we can divide those four stories into 15 minutes apiece, more or less. Um, what story would you like to start with, Kev, in our discussion?
Well, let's go chronologically. And The Open Boat was the first of the four that was published in Scribner's Magazine in 1897. Um, we just got to give, I would like to, before we start, to give Crane's dates. He was 1871 to 1900. He died at 28. Um, I'm not even sure of what, but I think it was tubercular, or at least related.
Mm-hmm.
And so he burned very brightly, and he died very young. But in that period of the 1890s, when he was writing, he was very productive. And his first uh, his first great short story is The Open Boat. Scribner's Magazine, June 1897. And this was based on a real event in his life where uh, earlier in that year of 1897, he got on a filibustering boat out of Jacksonville, Florida, to go to Cuba. And filibustering was a term they used for uh, various illegal endeavors. And in this case, it was running arms to the rebels in Cuba. As we know, the Spanish-American War would break out the very next year of 1898. And Crane, the intrepid journalist that he was on this certain boat. It was called the SS Commodore. And it had problems from the very beginning. Ran upon a sandbar, was towed off. Later on, it started leaking and eventually went down. So within about 24 hours after its launch, the boat had sunk, and there were some 30 or so passengers, including captain and crew. And Crane, he and the captain himself, along with the oiler is the guy at the time who went around and oiled the machinery in the steamships, SS steamship. And then uh, a fourth member of that company. I think it was a cook. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, the cook. And then Crane was the fourth member, And so they weren't far off the coast of Florida. Wasn't like they're in the middle of the Atlantic. So they had a fighting chance of getting back alive. But they were 30 hours at sea, and it was rather harrowing. And eventually, the oiler, he died. Billy was his name. And in fact, the short story is dedicated to him in the first place, and then Crane's two other uh, shipmates, as it were, boatmates. So this was based on a real story, and I'm particularly interested in stories based on your own life history because that's basically what my books are. That's what I do essentially. And there's a lot of changes that you affect, or sometimes not, depending on how interesting the story in and of itself might be. Sometimes it can just tell itself, but not often, in my case at least. But it seems in this case, the open boat, that was indeed the case because when Crane had written the first draft of it, I think, he showed it to the captain with whom he had shared this open boat. And the captain said, Stephen, you got it. That's exactly how it was. All right. And that's how we, the readers, feel. We're in that boat. Um, I am, at least, this reader, and I'm feeling the fatigue of the oiler and Stephen Crane in particular, who were the designated rowers. And rowing around, not for 30 hours, but just just for 5 minutes, because I used to row in college uh, at a much higher stroke rate, obviously. You got the legs involved and it's a race. But I can tell you, rowing is an exhausting activity. And so you had little Stephen Crane. I mean, I say little, he was rather spare. He was about 125 pounds. And he was manning this oar or these oars at intervals with the oiler. It was a big brawny fellow, the oiler, and more than pulling his weight. And there's a shark that appears, a shark fin at some point, uh, giant waves that they had to negotiate. Uh, just the concern, the worry, the anxiety of whether you're going to get back, that in and of itself eats away at you and your energy and your resources. And then just before, just as they see land and they think they're going to be making it in okay, you have a very violent shore break, and you can die 50 yards offshore just as easily as you can 500. And Crane has a nice little passage there where he says, "Oh, come on, you got to be kidding me. After all this, we're going to just die in the shore break." But again, as a surfer, uh, as a one-time surfer, no longer, yes, shore break can be very violent, and you can have deaths in the shore break as opposed to way out in the ocean. I'm talking deaths of very accomplished swimmers and watermen. So there's a lot of suspense. There's a lot of realism. There's a lot of camaraderie among the four in the book. It's like four men. Okay, we got to get through this together, guys. Let's uh, let's keep a good thought and let's keep our spirits up and let's see this thing through to a successful conclusion. And as I say, they Billy died, the oiler. He died in the last little sprint to the shore when the boat had been turned over by a wave. And Billy, who apparently was a very strong swimmer, this is the oiler again, he took off and was making, great time into shore, but then they found him. And this is not only in the story of the open boat, but in reality, they found him having drowned, and he was face down on the sand. So that's the story. And I think it is I think it's the best short story of his that I have read and also that we'll be talking about tonight. And for once, I think that the textbooks got it right. They made the right decision in including this in most of the anthologies. It's a wonderful story.
Okay, thank you for that summary. It was a pretty good one. Um, did you feel he got us into the characters really well? Is he good at characterizing these four distinct persons?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the one thing I will say right now, just generally speaking about Crane, is that he's always enjoyable. I mean, I always like to read his prose. It's always got a nice little kick to it. There's always a certain observation he's making that you haven't quite read or heard described that way. Um, he is great at defeating the cliche, which I think in an earlier podcast that you and I had, Tim, was one of my definitions for good writing. You know, you just don't repeat the stereotypical phrase that you've read, even if it's from Tolstoy. You just don't repeat it. Okay, you come up with your own version of things, and I find that to be the case with Crane. He's good at that. Yeah, you wanted to say?
Well, I was going to say, do you have any passages to pick out?
Yes, and
Example?
here is one. That's my long prologue to it.
Okay.
And this is the character of the captain. And we don't get into the character of him in particular, but we get into the character of his plight. His ship has just gone down, and he's lying in the bottom of the boat. He's injured apparently, and Crane writes, "The injured captain, lying in the bow, was at this time buried in that profound dejection and indifference which comes temporarily at least to even the bravest and most enduring when, willy-nilly, the firm fails, the army loses, the ship goes down." I think we all know that feeling, right? I mean, your your baby, your life, your responsibility, it's gone, and you are now out on your own, having to deal with that fact and the repercussions. So that's just a nice pithy description of where the captain's at this point, not necessarily his character, but he does that throughout the story and throughout his various stories. He's very good at capturing the character. Yes, indeed.
All right. Wonderful. So, did you have anything to read there?
I have one thing from the open boat I would like to read, just a good general passage that
Yeah.
I picked out just to give you, because we've just given you that little snippet, but this will give you an idea of Crane's style. They then briefly exchanged some addresses and admonitions. Okay, so this is right before they're going to paddle into shore with that powerful shore break. This might be it. All of them, or maybe just some of them, might not make it. So they briefly exchanged some addresses and admonitions. Right now, if I don't make it home, get in touch with my sweetheart or my
Mhm.
mother or something like that. As for the reflections of the men, there was a great deal of rage in them. Perchance they might be formulated thus: If I am going to be drowned, if I am going to be drowned, if I am going to be drowned, why in the name of the seven mad gods who rule the sea was I allowed to come thus far and contemplate sand and trees? Because they can see the shore very easily at this point. Was I brought here merely to have my nose dragged away as I was about to nibble the sacred cheese of life? It is preposterous. If this old ninny woman, Fate, cannot do better than this, she should be deprived of the management of men's fortunes. She is an old hen who knows not her intention. If she has decided to drown me, why did she not do it in the beginning and save me all this trouble? The whole affair is absurd. But no, she cannot mean to drown me. She dare not drown me. She cannot drown me. Not after all this work. Afterward, the man might have had an impulse to shake his fist at the clouds. Just you drowned me now, and then hear what I call you. All right, so Kane is very famous. Kane. Crane is very famous for his irony. Now, that's a very ironic passage. The whole situation is ironic that they have suffered all this, um, all that the sea has thrown at them, and now they're within sight of the shore, and then they're all going to die. And the way he describes it, of course, is a nice ironic, self-ironic
Okay.
tone. So
All right. Well, you've given us a good summary of what's going on with the open boat. What's the next story in the chronology?
next one is The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky. That's McClure's magazine. That was published in the next year in 1898. And that's my least favorite of the stories we're canvassing today. I didn't dislike it, but it didn't really rock my boat, as it were. It's about a, a sheriff with his newlywed, and they're on a train trip, I think out of Fort Worth, Texas. And I think the time is in the 90s. I don't think it's set back earlier than that. So it's not the Wild West that we have come to know through film and in other mediums. What we have here is a sheriff having married, and he's on the train back to his town where he is the sheriff, a town called Yellow Sky. And he's thinking about what they're going to what they're going to think about his bride, because he hasn't made any announcement to them. He just sort of left town. Now he's coming back with a bride. What are they going to think? Small town, obviously, small little Western town. And then, as we're taking this train ride, the scene shifts, right? So it's an omniscient narrator, as was the narrator for the open boat. The scene shifts into the town, Yellow Sky, to a bar. And there's some fellows at the bar, and they're talking, and it seems that there's this fellow on the loose, this sort of drunk desperado who is an arch enemy of the sheriff. And he's, yeah, as I say, he's on a binge. He's got both of his revolvers, and he's shooting up the town, basically, having a rootin' tootin' good time. And he comes to the saloon. They've shut the door. They don't want any part of him. And in revenge, he puts up a little piece of paper, nails it to the door, and then he goes back 20 paces and starts taking target practice at this little piece of paper on the door. Well, then the two scenes converge. The sheriff comes into Yellow Sky with his bride, and in the meantime, this desperado, he has shown up at the sheriff's house. He doesn't know that the sheriff is not there. As I said, the sheriff made no formal announcement of his quest in Fort Worth that he was getting married. So this guy's screaming at the house, saying, "Come on out, you yellow-bellied, lily-livered." And there's nothing in the house to come out. So the guy's standing around the house when around the corner of the house comes the sheriff with his bride. So the train has meantime arrived in Yellow Sky. And we have, what looks like is going to be a classic Western showdown. But no, the sheriff says, "Hey, man, they know each other. It's sort of like a fun little rivalry, actually, it seems, That's how it sounds. Because no, obviously they have had this rivalry going for quite a while, but no one has been killed, obviously, if they are two uh our two main characters are now facing one another. And the sheriff says, "Hey, come on, give me a break. This is my bride here. I'm just married. You can't challenge me to a gunfight here uh, with my newlywed at my side. This is not cricket, my good man." In so many words, I'm paraphrasing. And then the desperado says, I guess you're right. He puts away his six guns, he turns and walks away. That's the story. And it's kind of cute. And there's some nice atmospheric little passages about the Western town and the train traveling across the plains and the planes sort of rushing past the train, right? The idea that the planes are moving eastward, not the train going west. There's some nice little images, but I wasn't too thrilled by it. I thought to myself, that's something I could have probably done. Uh, and every time I think that, I don't put the story or the novel on a pedestal. If your humble servant could probably do the same thing. I mean that. If it didn't it didn't impress me. It didn't blow me away like the open boat. I couldn't have written a story like the open boat in the way that he wrote it, right? Um, but I thought I could probably do The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky pretty well. So there you have it.
Well, our last book prior to this was The Virginian by
Yeah.
Owen Wister. And this made me think of The Virginian. You had told us that The Virginian was one of the early forms of a Western novel with all the different archetypes and cliches that would imply. Um, how does this stack up as maybe a first short story as a Western? Were there any other short stories or longer stories? Because you told me the Virginian was kind of unique for its time. Was this another cowboy story unique for its time?
I can't tell you that, Tim, to tell you the truth. Uh, I knew previously the that Crane, he had the reputation of having broken with the sentimental Victorian treatment of various themes. This is particularly the case with Maggie, a Girl of the Streets, which he self-published in 1893 originally. Then he got it with a bigger, well, with a a commercial publishing house later. But he couldn't find a commercial publishing house originally. He had to self-publish because the material for that time was very racy, and it was about a an Irish family in the Bowery in New York, and the dirt, the violence, the drunkenness, and how Maggie eventually becomes a prostitute. And so this was not a euphemistic treatment of the world's oldest profession. Not that the whole story is about that, but it culminates in that. And so I came to The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky with that same idea that he was breaking with some kind of sentimental or overly heroized version of the American West.
Hmm.
And he does do that, and particularly in the last story, we'll look at the Blue Hotel, but leave the Blue Hotel aside for the moment. And the Virginian seems to be going back to that sort of Victorian sentimental treatment. Uh, he does a lot of innovative things, the Virginian. Like we said, he sets the template for the Western genre in literature and film in many ways, particularly the showdown. But also, I think you're probably about to say, he's about to get married, the Virginian, and then he has the showdown, and then he marries his intended. And this of course, um, is carried on in movies like High Noon. So maybe Crane was the first guy to come up with this idea of the sheriff newly married or just about to get. I mean, he might have come up with that idea. Maybe Wister is doing then his own version of that.
So what year was the Worcester? 1900?
1902 was the Virginian.
1902. So that came about 4 years after the Crane story.
Right. Crane was very well known among the writerly crowd, at the very least. He he Wister would have read this, I'm certain.
Okay. Do you think
It would just have to be the case. Yeah.
would he have been influenced by it to write his Virginian?
Who knows? Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe because
Yeah.
well,
Maybe he thought this was a very unheroic portrayal of the sheriff turning down a
mm,
gunfight, uh, and yeah, not
well,
putting this guy right.
the thing that I noticed that the two works have in common, uh, you know, very clearly, is woman as civilizing factor.
Yep.
That both of them have, the typical cowboy cliches and archetypes and mottos and themes. And then and the women come in at the end of both stories as a civilizing factor and through the institution of marriage. And I think that's what the message of both stories are, that we're in the Wild West. It's a man's world, but it's only going to get tamed by the women folk and the institution of marriage. I think that's kind of a common theme. Do you think I'm right on that or no?
Yeah, I think you're onto something if you're not, right on the nose with it. Yeah,
Mm,
definitely. It seems that that might be the case in particular with The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky,
mm,
because yeah, it's the civilized East because
yes,
we're coming east to the West.
right.
Now you might say Fort Worth. That's not very east, but it's east of Yellow Sky. And
Yes.
so yeah, the civilizing East, womanhood, uh, the institution of marriage, genteel manners, could be the case, Tim. Sounds like a good read. And that might be we might be able to generalize and say that Crane is perhaps showing how the West has now, and perhaps regrettably, in his opinion, because he was an adventurous soul,
Yeah.
that, and it was the case with Wister, who felt that was regrettably the case. He
Right.
saw our cowboys as being modern day knight errants,
Hmm.
and that world had vanished by the time he published The Virginian. So there is sort of a lament about
Excuse
the passing of this heroic world in The Virginian. Indeed, that might be the case with Crane too. Could be. I mean, he doesn't give us enough pages. He doesn't give us material to actually read that interpretation into it as confidently as I think we can probably do with The Virginian. But that might be a way of getting. That might be a way of me liking it a little bit more. That there was some grand scheme he was bringing to this, and the dying of the West, civilizing influence of the feminine.
And of the East.
Okay, it takes on larger larger significance for me. Then I can like it a little bit more. But it didn't do much for me, I must say.
Okay, very good summary. Our next story in the chronology is what?
The Monster.
Okay.
The Monster, Harper's Magazine, August 1898. And I think most people, even if they have some familiarity with Crane, they're not going to know the monster. I certainly didn't when I first discovered it, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, because I had read his other stuff. But then all of a sudden, monster? What's this? Interesting. And what it's about is it takes place in a small little town in New York. It has to be said that Crane was born in New Jersey. He spent many of his youthful years in not New York City, but New York State, outside of New York City, uh, in a place called Port Jervis. And it seems as though this might be the setting for this story, The Monster. It might be a fictionalized Port Jervis. He wrote a series of stories about this town where the monster takes place. It's called Willamville, Wilomville. He, in fact, wrote 14 stories. This seems to be the outstanding one of them, the one that has survived to this day with any popularity. And what it's about is a black coachman in this small town, and he works for a doctor, Dr. Trescott. And Dr. Trescott has a young son. The young son's name is Jimmy. And, well, the black coachman's name is Henry Johnson. And Henry and Jimmy have a nice, friendly, loving little relationship. Henry has sort of adopted, as it were, Jimmy. And he's a very good-looking, this is important, man, Henry. He's a swell. He's a dandy. He likes putting on nice threads and strutting through the town to, as we see in the opening pages, to see his fiancee, or whom he hopes will be his fiancee, his girlfriend that he likes to dress up for and then go visit. Well, Henry's coming back from a visit. I think it's to his fiancee or his would-be fiancee, and he sees that the house of Dr. Trescott is on fire. The mother, it's at night, right? The mother, wife of Dr. Trescott, mother of Jimmy, comes running out, and at this moment, Henry just happens on the scene. The Dr. Trescott is off on a house call or something. She says, "Oh, Henry, Jimmy's there. You have to save him. He's in the fire. He's in his bedroom." Henry, without any hesitation, he plunges into the house, which is engulfed in flame. He makes his way to Jimmy's bedroom, and he finds Jimmy, takes him up into his arms, and he can't go back the way he came. By this time, the fire has spread, but he knows of a secret stairway, passageway down to Dr. Trescott's laboratory. And then there's a door that he can exit the house from in the laboratory. Well, he gets down there. Well, when he gets there, he sees that he's not gonna get out. You know, the laboratory is also engulfed in flames. And at a certain point, he's at the end. He tries to make his way back to the stairs, but he can't. At a certain point, he just, with one last superhuman lunge, with the last of his strength, he throws Jimmy, throws the kid, but it's to save the kid's life. He throws the kid out near the window, through the flames, over the flames, while he just collapses. And he happens to collapse right near a table full of all kinds of chemical substances. And he's lying there unconscious right at the edge of the table. And then a certain substance tips over because of the fire, and it runs along the table and then drips down into his face, basically destroying his face. it's some sort of, you know, acid. I don't know exactly. I forget. Maybe it's described specifically, but I forget what it was. But something that's not going to do your handsome features any favors. So he's lying there. All of a sudden, Dr. Trescott comes home from a house call. Everyone says, "Hey, Henry's in there. Your son Jimmy's in there." Dr. Trescott goes in. He goes down to his laboratory. That's the only place he can go at this point. He finds Jimmy near the window, gets him out. Then he sees Henry, and he tries to get Henry, but he can't. But someone else does. So they bring Henry out. So Jimmy has survived. The house is, in flames. It will not survive. Uh, Henry has survived, but his face is gone. Well, in gratitude to Henry, Dr. Trescott does all he can to save his life. There's no saving his face. I mean, this is the 1890s. They didn't have the plastic surgery they have today. And the way Crane describes it, it's like even today it would have been, you know, wouldn't have helped much. So Henry, his life is saved by Dr. Trescott, but his life is ruined also by Dr. Trescott. And for the rest of the story, what we have is Dr. Trescott trying to protect Henry from the citizenry of the town who view him as a monster. A monster. This man who did this beautifully selfless act to save this little white boy. They avoid him. They don't want anything to do with him. And they avoid and don't want anything to do with Dr. Trescott either. His whole family has been ostracized, essentially. Dr. Trescott tries to get Henry into a black family that he knows so they can, kind of take care of him, serve as a little cocoon for him, ward off the white villagers who are not at all enthused about having this monster in their town at all. And then even the black family has difficulties dealing with this fellow because he's a little bit crazy in the head at this point too. I mean, who wouldn't be? Who wouldn't be? And Dr. Trescott takes him back into his home. He puts him in the coach house, and even Jimmy is sort of traitorous. He mocks Henry, not to his face, but with his friends. And he plays a little game toward the end of the story where he says, I bet you don't, because Henry's sitting out in the backyard by himself. And he says to his friends, I bet you won't dare to go up and touch him. And then they say, you touch him. And so Jimmy goes up and touches him. Then some other guy goes up and then doesn't quite touch him, but he got near him. So yeah, even Jimmy is not, he's not defending his savior. And the story ends by uh, a little group of some of the more well-regarded citizens of this town, the men. They go and they visit this doctor, and they say, you got to get rid of this Henry. This is not going to work. We don't want to see your practice ruined. People are not, engaging you as their physician any longer. Don't you see it? And, you know, uh, you can't go on this way. And the doctor says, no, I have to. And the story ends with him speaking with his wife, who's has her face in her hands. I think she's sobbing. He said, "What's the matter, dear?" She said, "Well, I had a little I had a little tea party planned, and 15 people were invited, and no one came." So they have been completely ostracized from the society of this town because of this monster, as the town sees it, who is anything but from a moral point of view. So you have this interesting sort of paradox that Henry, who has suffered a literal defacement, and the Trescotts, who have suffered, at least in the minds of the villagers, they have suffered a loss of face for just harboring this fellow, that now they are being ostracized by the small-mindedness of these small towners. So this is a very disturbing story, and I liked it because it it spoke to me at a visceral level about how people are unjustifiably pushed out of uh, of the in group, and how this Henry, through no fault of his own, he has been a victim of these small town racial prejudices, probably first and foremost, but every other kind of prejudice you can imagine. If someone who doesn't look like us isn't good looking, and they just shouldn't be here, right? So,
Okay, very well explicated. Um, you told me that, and I think you wrote about it in LA Kid a little bit, that you had some bad acne when you were young and it made you feel ostracized.
yeah, I didn't write about so much. I think I think in LA Kid, I had a little girl say that I had zits, right?
Yeah.
But I
So I'm,
didn't.
I'm wondering if that's the visceral level that you feel it, that you didn't have you have a pretty handsome face now, but you didn't have a perfect face back when you were young, according to your own
Well,
testimony. Does it
it's
speak to you on that level?
hardly perfect now, Tim. However, yes, I think certainly, yeah. I mean, if you have suffered from teenage acne, not too many people do these days because they've cured it essentially
Yeah,
with Accutane, so you
right.
won't see that. But I was just a couple of years before the cure, so I got the treatment, certainly, explicitly, or just they let you understand. Yeah, so I do understand. I did have a visceral identification with this Henry Johnson. But the difference between him and me is that I wasn't heroic in the acquisition of my pimples. I mean, this is yeah, I just got them. You know, it could
Okay,
happen to anyone. Uh, and he he got the very undeserving fate of becoming this monster after having done this beautifully selfless act. So
gotcha.
so yeah, I mean, my adolescent acne, yeah, a little bit, but it went beyond that. It's just the injustice that people have to suffer when they are the exact opposite of what people conceive them as.
Gotcha.
He's
And
not a monster. He's not a monster. He's an angel.
yes, yes, and yeah. In other words, you weren't dealing with any moral implications
No, I just had the bad luck of having a bad complexion. That's all. But this guy did something to get the disfigurement, and
Right.
it was a thing that is is in most circles, in most uh, it, everywhere in across time and place in the history of mankind is something that would be lauded. But then all of a sudden, these small towners they say, well, we just can't have this ugly black man here. And he was a very good looking fellow too, before that. So
Gotcha.
that's it.
Interesting story. Good explication. And we have one more story at the Blue Hotel. We have about 15 minutes for that now, if you'd like to weigh in.
Yeah, the Blue Hotel. This is, I think, the more compelling of the two Western stories. The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky, the first, this the second. This was published in the Collier's Weekly, November 1898. And this is this is actually easily told. Uh, there's a certain town in Nebraska, western town, and at the train station, it's a little whistle stop. Descending from the train are a cowboy, an Easterner, and a Swede. They don't have names. That's how they're described by Crane. And meeting the train, always meeting the train, is this hotelier, hotelier, I think. Pat Scully, Irishman, and he wants to get customers for his hotel. It's a blue hotel. Looks rather incongruous there on the Nebraska plains, but it's painted blue. And he recruits these three fellows to go to his hotel. And it's snowing. There's a big blizzard out. And the hotel is called the Palace Hotel. All right. Pretensions of grandeur. And what happens is these three gentlemen they gather around the stove in the middle of the lobby, I guess, of the hotel. There's at the begin when they walk in, there's a certain farmer there. There's also the son of Scully. His name is what is his name? Um, I had it written down here. Johnny. And so you have these five characters plus Scully in the scene in the opening pages, warming themselves at the stove. The farmer has some sort of problem. He starts to become annoying. He is escorted out of the hotel. And then the Swede starts to kind of flip out. He starts to think, he starts to get paranoid. He thinks that he's going to be killed. Then he says, a man was killed here and I'm going to be killed. Things like this. And they tell him to calm down, man. What are you flipping out for? Well, eventually he goes up to his room where he wants to pack his things and leave, thinks he's going to be killed. Scully goes up, he gives him a shot of whiskey, shows him some pictures of his family, calms him down. Swede comes back down, they start playing cards, and the Swede is maybe he's been a bit taken with the drink. He starts to become rather rude, overbearing, so no longer paranoid and scared, but the opposite. And at one point, he accuses the son of Scully, which is Johnny Scully. He accuses him of cheating. Well, they have a big argument, and then uh, the Swede, I believe, he starts to choke Johnny. Anyway, he lays his hands on him, and then Mr. Scully comes in. He says, "Okay, we're gonna have a fair fight here, right?" So they go out behind the hotel, protect a little bit from the blizzard, and they have a fist fight. Johnny and the Swede, and of course Scully, the Easterner, and the cowboy. uh, They are all for Johnny. because they all think the Swede is a nut, right? And he's much bigger than Johnny. Well, that's interestingly described by Crane. It's kind of an impressionistic view of the fight, and the Swede wins. And Mr. Scully is very fair. He says, "Okay, poor Johnny, but it was a fair fight. Fight's over. Go back to the hotel, and the cowboy says, I'm going to challenge that Swede." And Scully says, "No, you don't. That was not your fight. That was Johnny's fight, right?" So very fair-minded, honorable man, Mr. Scully. And then he won't even take the Swede's money when he leaves. He says, "I don't want your money." All right. So man of honor, Mr. Scully. And the Swede goes out into the blizzard and he goes to a bar. He's reveling in his victory and he orders a couple drinks, drink or two at the bar. And sitting at a table are a couple of the town's citizens. And one of those is a card sharp. And they're playing cards. He's a professional gambler, actually. He's described in very admiring terms by Crane, actually, because this fellow, he only preys on hick farmers who wander into town. He doesn't prey on his fellow citizens. And the Swede, he starts telling about how he beat up Johnny and what a heroic fight it was. And he says, have a drink, gentlemen." And they all say, "No, we'd rather not. Thank you very much." And the Swede will not take no for an answer. And then he goes to the table and he basically confronts the gambler and he says, "Come on, you're going to have a drink with me." So being very, uh, really out of line here. And the gambler says, "No, thank you, sir. I'd prefer not to." And then the Swede attacks him. And then the gambler pulls a knife and he stabs him. And the Swede is lying there dead on the floor. And the one of the penultimate scenes is the Swede lying on the floor and Crane describing on the cash register on the bar how there's a little, I guess when you in those days with these old style cash registers, there'd be a little that would flip up once it took your money and it says, "This registers the amount of your purchase." So more Crane irony there. Uh, the Swede got what he bought. He got killed. He had been making trouble from the beginning. His purchase had been realized. And there's sort of there's a nice ending to it. It's sort of a summary of the story's thesis, where it says, where later on, a few weeks later, the Easterner and the cowboy are talking about this whole event. And "Fun or not," said the Easterner, "Johnny was cheating." So he reveals to the cowboy that Johnny was in fact cheating. The Swede was right. He was right to accuse him. "I saw him. I know it. I saw him, and I refused to stand up and be a man. I let the Swede fight it out alone. And you were simply puffing around the place and wanting to fight. And then old Scully himself, we are all in it. The poor gambler isn't even a noun." He's alluding to the gambler who knifed the Swede. "He isn't even a noun. He is kind of an adverb. Every sin is the result of a collaboration. We, 5 of us, have collaborated in the murder of this Swede. Usually there are from a dozen to 40 women really involved in every murder. But in this case, it seems to be only 5 men. You, I, Johnny, Old Scully, and that fool of an unfortunate gambler came merely as a culmination, the apex of a human movement, and gets all the punishment. The cowboy, injured and rebellious, cried out blindly into this fog of mysterious theory. Well, I didn't do anything, did I? End of story. So Crane is attributing guilt and by extension, moral agency to people in bringing about the downfall of this Swede. So much for naturalism. It's not a deterministic view of the universe, one of his more renowned stories. And they're always saying how Crane is the great naturalist, right?
Mhm.
They're always every time you look at a review, Wikipedia, everything's he's a naturalist, a naturalist, a naturalist. Well, I
Sure.
read that. Wait a second. That's not naturalism. Naturalism is Maggie, a girl of the streets. Yes. It's the slow slide into degradation and your final doom. But not here. There are certain choices that people made along the way which could have had a different outcome, is what he says extremely explicitly. So I think if anyone wants to get something new from our little podcast on Mr. Crane, they might want to take this under consideration that that's not naturalism at all.
Okay. Fair enough challenge. Um, we don't have an extraordinary amount of viewers, but the few who do come here, we invite you to put your comments about any of this. But that's an interesting point there to comment on. Is the Blue Hotel naturalist? And if not, is Stephen Crane the great naturalist and his other works? Uh, they would talk about the Red Badge of Courage as an example of naturalism. We're not going to be surveying that, but certainly you hear about that in schools too. When I
Yeah.
all my English classes, he's described as the naturalist. But that's interesting that you see an is it an anti-naturalist message or just non-naturalist?
It's anti-naturalist.
Okay.
He's saying that we all have moral agency, that we can make certain decisions
Huh.
with our free will that will change the outcome of something. And that, by definition, is not naturalism. Naturalism means that we're all fated, we're all doomed because we cannot change the story. We
Yeah.
we we're a product of our environment. We're a product of our human relationships. We're a product of our genetic inheritance. This is Jack London. This is not Stephen Crane in the Blue Hotel. He tells us that himself. It's not me reading into it
Right.
anything. Yeah.
All right. Nice insight here for the end of our program for the day. Do you have any final thoughts, Kev, before I finish the broadcast?
Well, Hemingway loved Crane, and he talks in The Green Hills of Africa. It's often cited how uh, The Open Boat and The Blue Hotel are his best stories. And I agree with The Open Boat. Blue Hotel isn't bad. I mean, I don't think I'd mention it in the same breath as Huckleberry Finn, which Hemingway basically does in this little screed of his in the Green Hills of Africa. However, I can see how Hemingway loves him because he was in the Hemingway mold before Hemingway was even born. Hemingway born 1899, 1 year before Crane's death. He was uh, a swashbuckling reporter. He went to war zones. He he knew he knew the mean streets of New York. That's why he was able to write Maggie. a girl of the streets. He knew the West. He went out west for a stint. That's why he was able to write The Blue Hotel and The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky. And he died actually in the Black Forest in Germany in a sanitarium, I think, because of his tuberculosis. So he did a lot in his 28 years, and he was trained as a journalist, which I think was also um, a point of commonality
Right.
and an attraction uh, for Hemingway. Uh, and because I think I think Crane's a fine writer, but to put him at the level of Henry James and Mark Twain, which is what Hemingway does in The Green Hills of Africa. He says our good writers are Stephen Crane, Mark Twain, and Henry James. Wow. I mean, that Stephen Crane gets slipped in there. And I think it's not accidentally, because he did lead the life that I think Hemingway dreamed of leading, and eventually did.
All right, Kev, good session. We're done. Any thoughts on what we're going to do next time, or do we talk about that privately later?
We can talk about private. I think we're done with Mr. Crane. I don't want to spoil uh, what I feel is a very admiring critique on my part of Mr. Crane. But his most famous work, Red Badge of Courage, I never quite got it. I never liked it, to tell you the truth. Could be my fault. I'm willing to take that on my head. But Tim and I, we don't, or I don't in particular, want to read books that I know in advance I'm likely to dislike. And I don't, I've read it twice and I don't want to read it a third time knowing that I'm probably not going to like it.
Okay.
Because then, even if I didn't like it, I would be impelled to discuss it with Tim because I don't want to waste that third reading. I want to get something out of it. So I don't want to read that book. I will say this, that many people, of course, that I admire that book. But one person whom I do greatly admire as a writer, Ambrose Bierce, he had no patience with the Red Badge of Courage, probably because he himself was a Civil War vet. And anytime you have some young upstart who was born 6 years after the event that was the core experience of your life, and about which you wrote quite a bit. His most famous short piece, of course, is the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. Uh, he he's going to look askance even at the attempt to capture what it was like to be a soldier back then. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Nothing against the Red Badge of Courage. I just want to tell you folks why we wouldn't be talking about the most obvious thing to talk about with Stephen Crane. I never got into it.
All right. Fair enough. I am impressed with the turn of the century authors we've been getting. We've had Joseph Conrad, Owen Wister, Mark Twain, Stephen Crane. We're almost ready to put together a college course on turn of the century American literature here. I think another good person in that era of note is Theodore Dreiser, another naturalist. We
Yeah.
might think about doing something by him, or we might not. We'll be talking about this behind the scenes, and we'll bring back something good. I can guarantee you that.
Well, what I can say is that the 90s are a seminal period in American literature because that's when we're finally breaking away from the British models.
Hmm.
Emerson and Poe and who's the guy who wrote the Scarlet Letter? Help me. Nathaniel Hawthorne,
Nathaniel Hawthorne.
right? And even Melville to a degree. They all wrote in British prose. But then you have Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn. We go back and look at our podcast, everyone, see what I mean. And then you had the likes of Stephen Crane and Jack London, and then Mr. Hemingway. following in their footsteps in the 20s, where we really came into our own as uh, a a literature to be reckoned with on its own merits, and not just because we are writing uh, well like our British forebears.
Right.
No, we're doing our own thing at that point. So that
Mhm.
the 10, 20, 30 years leading up to Hemingway, they were necessary to produce a Hemingway. That's why the
Gotcha.
1890s are so seminal.
Okay, well, we're covering quite a bit of it. We'll see what we do next time. In the meantime, thank you for listening and watching, and we will see you hopefully very soon. Okay? Bye bye.
See you later.
Thanks, Kev. Oops, I have to press this one, I think.